With the arrival of Shenhe's first rerun after what seems like a literal eternity, let's break down everything about Shenhe to help you understand how to use her and why you may want to get her. Remember that at the end of the day, it is your choice whether you want to pull or skip on this banner. I am simply going to objectively speak on the character and what she has to offer. Simply put, Shenhe is an off-field cryo buffer whose main purpose is to buff cryo damage through her elemental skill and burst. While she lacks in personal damage, this is mitigated by her buffing abilities, as she gives buffs such as damage percent bonus, cryo and physical resistance shred, and additional damage from her Icy Quill mechanic. She can also function as a decent battery, but this is secondary to her buffing capabilities. Because of her attachment to cryo units and teams, she can work on a variety of cryo teams such as freeze, reverse melt, and physical. Let me explain exactly what her elemental skill does because it can be kind of confusing upon first read when considering things like her Ascension 4 passive and her Icy Quill mechanic. In short, her skill has a tap and a hold option that will deal cryo damage upon casting. Her tap deals cryo damage to enemies along the path, while her hold deals damage in a small AoE. When her Ascension 4 passive is unlocked, tapping or holding grants different buffs, and knowing which to use can slightly affect your DPS depending on who or what you are primarily buffing. Tapping grants nearby party members an increase in elemental skill and burst damage by 15% for 10 seconds. Holding it provides the same increase, but for normal, charge, and plunging attack damage, and lasts 15 seconds instead. At C1, this won't matter too much since having an additional charge allows you to have both buffs simultaneously since their buff durations are independent from each other. However, Sacrificial Polearm doesn't exist, so at C0, it's good to keep in mind which you might need for whatever situation you're facing. For the vast majority of situations at C0, you'll be using her tap mode as it fits better in most team rotations and generally benefits most, if not every character. Shenhe's Icy Quill mechanic provides a flat damage bonus to normal attacks, elemental skills, and bursts that deal cryo damage to enemies. The damage scales off of Shenhe's attack at the time of casting her skill. Icy Quills have a quota, maxing out at 5 quills if you tap her skill and 7 quills if you hold it. This quota is independent and applicable to each party member, and each quill is consumed per instance of cryo damage. What is considered as quote cryo damage includes damage done through cryo-infused attacks by animo units whose abilities have elemental absorption. Abilities like Kazuha's elemental skill, Sucrose's and Venti's elemental burst are examples of such attacks. Most characters have methods of dealing multiple instances of damage in quick succession or abilities that hit multiple enemies at once, so taking advantage of her quills is relatively easy. Next, let's get into Shenhe's elemental burst. Upon casting her burst, she deals one instance of AoE cryo damage before creating a field that deals cryo damage over time. Enemies inside of the field have their cryo and physical resistance decrease by a certain percentage based on her burst talent level. For reference, at level 10, her burst provides a 15% resistance decrease, which is the maximum amount of resistance shred her burst can have even with Constellations. Adding on the fact that her Ascension 1 passive provides a 15% cryo damage bonus to the active character inside of the field, her burst is valuable to use and thus you want to be able to cast it each rotation. So, which talents should you upgrade first for Shenhe? Her skill should be first in priority as it provides a lot of team-wide buffs that you really can't miss out on, as well as providing more damage for her teams overall. Next in priority is the Elemental Burst due to its resistance shred increasing with levels. Her auto attacks aren't really worth leveling unless you really love her and are simply triple grinding her, or you want to for no specific reason. Now let's get into Shenhe's constellations and how beneficial getting each one is. Starting with her Constellation 1, Clarity of Heart. This constellation gives her an additional charge, allowing you to reliably use her elemental skill multiple times in quick succession. Because her Ascension 4 passives tap and hold buffs are independent from each other, as I mentioned earlier in her skill section, both can coexist at the same time. It is important to note, however, that using her skill multiple times does not stack her Icy Quill quota. It can only refresh or override it. For example, if you tap and then hold immediately after, her quill quota just simply goes from 5 to 7 instead of stacking for a total of 12 stacks instantly. Overall, this constellation provides a slight increase in team DPS by increasing the total quills available and used per instance of cryo damage, as well as lowering her energy requirements. Next is her Constellation 2, Centered Spirit. This constellation increases her elemental burst duration by 6 seconds, making it last 18 seconds instead of 12 seconds. Additionally, active characters inside of the field deal 15% increased cryo crit damage, and that crit damage increase lingers for about a couple seconds longer after her burst ends. This is by far her best constellation for her contribution to the team's DPS due to the increased uptime on her elemental burst. If you're considering getting constellations for Shenhe, then C2 would be an amazing stopping point. For Constellation 3 and 5, Seclusion and Divine Attainment increases the level of her elemental skill and burst by 3 respectively. Like other talent level upgrades, they provide a very minimal increase in DPS when compared to their previous constellation and are overall not that valuable nor impactful. Onto her Constellation 4, Insight. Characters that trigger Icy Quills grant Shenhe a Skyfrost Mantra stack. Skyfrost Mantra has a maximum of 50 stacks, and the stacks last for a whole minute. After Shenhe uses her Elemental Burst, she'll consume all the stacks, increasing the damage of her burst by 5% per stack consumed. While this does give her a nice increase for her personal damage, it won't really do much in increasing team-wide DPS. Overall, this Constellation is not that amazing. Lastly, her Constellation 6, Mystical Abandon. Her Icy Quill quota won't be consumed when characters trigger Icy Quills through normal and charge attacks. While on paper this Constellation may sound amazing, in practice it doesn't really do that much since most characters can consume her Icy Quill quota through things like elemental skills and bursts just as easily as through normal and charge attacks. You could avoid this by, well, not using such abilities, but that would of course result in a DPS loss that just isn't worth it. Thus, this Constellation is only really useful for whales with other highly invested C6 cryo units and is really not that valuable outside of this demographic. Knowing how to build Shenhe is relatively easy, but still somewhat important to know. Although her buffs scale off of her attack, having an 80 energy cost on her elemental burst requires you to give her at least some energy recharge. While her traditional attack support build is full attack percent, you can opt for something like an energy recharge Sands if using an attack percent stat weapon, or if you have too little energy recharge, or a crit circlet if you're using something like Favonius Lance. She doesn't benefit much from stacks outside of attack and energy recharge, so for artifact sets, an immediate go-to can be a 2-piece mix and match with any 18% attack pieces. You can also mix this with 2-piece energy recharge with Emblem if you need it, or if it's just the best combination that you have available. If you're running her as a cryo burst support instead of her traditional build, then something like 4-piece Noblesse if no one else is holding it, or 4-piece Blizzard Strayer can work, with her main stats overall being attack or ER Sands, cryo damage goblet, and crit circlet for this specific build. Regarding her energy needs, Shenhe on average needs about 180% energy recharge. Using Favonius Lance lowers this to around 160 to 170 energy recharge, and with more cryo units or characters with energy passives like Venti, it can drop to as low as 130%. Onto her weapon options, going from highest to lowest in priority and general strength in comparison to other choices. Her best in slot, Calamity Queller, is of course by far her best weapon. It provides an absurdly high base attack with an attack percent secondary stat, elemental damage bonus, and attack percent increase in its passive. All of these give her a nice boost in her buffing abilities. This passive is even more effective when she's off field, as the attack increase doubles when the character isn't on the field. Engulfing Lightning, Skyward Spine, and Vortex Vanquisher are also decent options, as they all either have a decent enough base attack to work and secondary stats, or have specific stats that are generally useful for Shenhe. For 4-star weapons, Favonius Lance is an immediate go-to option, as it provides team-wide energy and gives slightly more offensive flexibility. Plus, its base attack is justifiable enough for the energy aid that it gives. The catch can work, but it's mainly for personal damage and has a low base attack, making only its energy recharge secondary stat the useful thing about it. And with characters like Raiden Shogun and Jiangling benefiting more from using this weapon, especially at higher refinements, it makes the catch even less of a priority. Lastly is Wavebreaker's Fin, as it has a moderately high base attack and with refinements can boost her buffing capabilities and personal damage. For team compositions, Shenhe's default team is, of course, Freeze, as her buffing capabilities work amazing in these teams with the resistance shred and damage bonus stats. She is also very synergistic with the DPS and support units that are typically played in such teams. Outside of Freeze teams, Shenhe can flex into compositions such as Monocryo, Reverse Melt variations, and physical with characters like Eula. And before I end this video, I'm actually going to go ahead and show you guys a clip of me using Shenhe in the current Abyss cycle in an Ayaka Freeze team.
Take flight! Wind and cloud. Into the wind.
Hold the line. Embrace the ice. My apologies.
Alright, and that is going to conclude this Shenhe video. If you guys did enjoy, then be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Let me know if there was anything that I could add or anything else that you would like to know in the comments below. And until the next video, bye bye.